Committee, and we do hope that we won't have any sudden SOPs land in the committee stage as well. Thank you.
I call Dr. Deborah Russell. Madam Speaker, I rise to commend this bill to the House. It's a tidying up bill, and it's a tidying up bill in two senses. And I do want to talk about both those senses in which it's a tidying up bill tonight. As has been eloquently described by Mr Young, this bill deals with what happens at the end of life, in some respects at the end of life of oil fields. What goes on, and this is the first aspect of tidying up in this Crown Minerals Amendment Bill. So, Madam Speaker, what goes on when an oil field or a mineral deposit gets to the end of its life is that the original firm that perhaps discovered, developed, and then used the oil field or the mineral deposit or whatever, they pull out. They've gotten their share out of it. And they reach the point where, from their point of view, continuing to work the field would just engage them in costs that they don't want to spend. In fact, it's reached the end of its profitable life from their point of view. So the original company or the business that has used and developed and used the field says actually it's time to move on. And look, this is a really common pattern in any sort of business or in many activities. In many activities, it's very easy to say get the first 50% of the profits. Or, from my old profession as a university lecturer, it's dead easy for students to get the first 50% of the marks. But often it's a lot harder to get, say, the next 20% of the profits, so you're up to 70% overall. And then it's even harder to get the next 10% of the profits. It gets harder and harder and harder to make a decent profit out of an oil field. So at that stage, what happens is that the company, the business that was exploiting the oil field in the first place, they stop and they hand it over to a specialist firm. So a specialist firm that has real skills and expertise in, say, getting the last 20% of the oil, the gas, the mineral out of the field. They're clean-up companies. If we were being perhaps a little rude, we might call them scavengers, but that would be unfair. What they are is firms with specialist skills and cleaning up at the end of a field. So it's in that sense that this bill is about tidying up. It's about tidying up the end of an oil field. And as has been described, there are some real risks with this, because typically the Crown, when it allows a company to exploit an oil field or a mineral deposit or whatever, one of the things that it is very concerned about is ensuring that that field is reinstated, that it's tidied up properly, that any environmental ills are put right, that wells are properly capped off, that when the last of the minerals, the oils, are taken out of that field, it is all tidied up. And the big concern there is that the tidy-up firm will not have the resources to do it. And that's why we have a system of permitting in place, so that the firms that are contractually obliged to tidy up at the end, so that we can assess them as to whether or not they really will have the resources to follow through on that obligation. And that's why when the permit of a field is changed from one operator to another, the permit to exploit a field, we actually get some ministerial involvement. The minister has to be notified, has to certify that it can all happen. So it's ministerial approval. Now that's quite a high level of engagement from government in a field. But there's a little bit of a loophole in the current legislation. And I wanted to sort of make it very clear by means of an example. Now, at the moment, when there is a change of a permit operator, then that requires the consent of the minister. But what, say, the permit is held by a company which was set up for the purpose just of holding the permit. So, look, imagine a firm which we might call something like, I don't know, Deep Drill Limited. They hold the permit. They've got to the end of the life. And they decide that they're going to transfer the permit, sell the permit on to another firm. I'm going to call this firm something like Ring the Last Drop Out Limited. Now, when it is just transferred from Deep Drill Limited to Ring the Last Drop Out Limited, you sell the permit, then you get ministerial approval, you get the minister involved. But there's a way to avoid that. Instead of selling the permit, what could happen is that the company, Deep Drill, which holds the permit, could be sold. All right, so the control of the company could be sold. So Ring the Last Drop Out Limited, instead of buying the permit, it would in fact buy the company. So you'd change who controlled the operation of that permit. And at present, that change of control doesn't need ministerial approval. So, in other words, there's a loophole there which needs to be tidied up and closed up. Because in actual fact, that is a change in who is operating that oil field or that mineral deposit. But because it is the company ownership that changes, rather than the ownership of the permit itself, the minister doesn't get involved. Yet the reality on the ground is actually exactly the same as if it had been a straightforward sale of the permit. So we're going to get the minister involved and make sure that when the control of the company that holds the permit is changed, then the minister gets involved too. That's one of the tidying up aspects of this particular bill. It is seeking to tidy up that particular little loophole that was existing there. Now, the work that does all this is sitting in Clause 8 of the bill, and you'll see that there is a whole set of clauses there, of rules there, that in actual fact mean that when there is a change in control, that means that the minister must be notified and go through exactly the same sorts of processes as there would have been if the permit was sold directly. So that's a very clear piece of tidying up in this legislation around the tidying up of oil fields and mineral deposits. And that's the first obvious reason why it's a tidying up bill. But I do want to draw your attention and the attention of my colleagues to another aspect of this bill, in the sense in which it's also a tidying up bill. And I invite my colleagues to turn to the actual bill itself and the general policy statement that's at the first part of the explanatory note. And there's a particular word that is used again and again and again in this explanatory note. You see, the bill, the Crowned Minerals Amendment Bill, it clarifies that an extension of the duration of a permit cannot be denied. It clarifies time frames for notifying the revocation of permits. It clarifies processes in relation to changes of control. It clarifies that an access arrangement is needed. It clarifies which ministers enter into access arrangement. It clarifies the applicable royalty calculations. Clarifies, 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 clarifies. Repeated again and again and again in the explanatory note of this bill. And that's actually really important. See, a lot of the aspects that this bill addresses, they were kind of there in the legislation, but they just weren't as clear as they might have been. In particular, they weren't necessarily as clear as they might have been for changing commercial realities. So part of what this bill does is it clarifies the regulatory framework for the Crown Minerals Act. Now, that's really important. Businesses hate uncertainty. Regulators hate uncertainty. Government hates uncertainty. You know, business can operate pretty well in adverse conditions. Business can operate well in good conditions. But talk to business operators, and what they don't like is uncertainty. Now, we are a government that provides certainty. Our oil and mineral companies know with certainty how long they'll be able to get exploration permits for. They know how long they'll be able to continue to operate for. We have developed great certainty around this. This bill, Madam Speaker, adds to the certainty of the regime around oil exploitation, around mineral exploitation, around the exploitation of Crown minerals in New Zealand. And that is why this clarification, that word clarification, is terribly important in this bill. It's another aspect of the tidying up that this bill does. So 2 sets of tidying up. One for the oil fields that are being tidied up, and one tidying up the actual legislation to create certainty for business.
Your time has expired.
Madam Speaker.
I call Andrew Falloon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to speak tonight on the